Well, it feels like all of my days have been raining, 'cause every single day is just another set of clothes in the corner of my bedroom suite. Yeah.
In the beginning, there were two. She wandered barefooted in the snow, clutching the torn and bloody dress to her chest. And he, a bulky old warrior, covered in wolfskin, sword by his side. They noticed each other in the distance, mirroring shadows in flight. Their trajectories seemed to glide together naturally, against their better judgment and desires. The first real glimpse they caught of each other frightened them equally. She thought him a monstrous wolf legend. He saw a spectre, draped in white, a fiery halo whipping up around her face. But the storm receded, and playful nature took away their fantastic attributes, and they were left in front of each other as they were. He, a one-eyed Norseman, towering above her in height and in girth, bearded, scowling, his sword conspicuous, and she, a Roman matron, small in frame, red-haired, trembling in her fluttering white dress, but clutching beneath the torn fabric her hidden dagger. He relaxed visibly, while she continued to shake her resolutely, whether from cold or fear, she didn't know. The Norseman moved abruptly, taking out his sword. She was ready with her dagger. But he simply planted it in the ground, speaking in his own language, loud and uncouth, or so it seemed to her, removed the wolfskin from his shoulders, and nearing her, draped it around her shaking figure. He held it tightly round her neck with one rough palm. When she didn't move, he raised his fist closer to her face and repeated the same words again. Only then did it occur to her that he wanted her to hold the fur around her shoulders herself. She reached out a hand, still pale with cold, and replaced his firm grip. The fur smelled strange, but it was warm. And she collapsed to her knees, making a cocoon of it around herself. And she fell asleep. The Norseman thought her peculiar and wondered if she spoke at all. In the corner of her eye, he saw a quick movement. He turned around just in time to spot the graceful prancing of a deer. When she awoke, it was the smell of meat roasting. It was night. The cold was biting, but in her fur cocoon, she felt protected. The Norseman had prepared a fire on which he was now roasting the carcass of the deer. He caught her hungry look and said something. She chose to think of it as an invitation, and shuffling to the fire, sat down by it, expectantly. He laughed, and with his sword cut off a deer leg and gave it to her. The Norseman ate noisily and with great appetite. She noticed he had fashioned himself a new cloak from the deer's skin, although it barely covered his massive shoulders. After their meal was finished, the Norseman was in great spirits and began talking energetically. He was trying to tell her a story, not about himself, nor of the real world, but a story about heroes. And while his words made little sense to her, his gestures, tone of his voice, and his face spoke volumes. She knew when the story was suspenseful, or when a god was enraged, or a maiden in love. And there was nothing quite as amusing as seeing the expressions pass over his face, and the energy he put into his explanations. And at some point she found herself laughing. He was pleased, for she had laughed at the right point in the story. The moon waned, and they fell asleep, huddled next to the dying fire. She awoke while he slept and felt indebted to his kindness. She walked around and found a tree in the forest, still bearing fruit. She brought an armful back to the Norseman, laid them in a neat pile before his sleeping face. When he awoke, he was delighted and consumed them all ravenously. And time passed in this vein for so long that they lost track of its existence. The winter seemed never ending. He wasn't handsome, but he smiled kindly. He was past his prime, but not yet grey. He thought she was sparrow-like, graceful and small. Her voice, when she finally spoke, like the trills of birds in spring. They never spoke of their lives, and they never really understood each other. But there was a deeper current underlying the weariness that united them. They were man and woman, Roman and Norse, Juno and Odin. Yet this Juno, weary of her husband's infidelities, had slain him in his sleep, for all his soldiers and Caesars could not save him. And this Odin feared the relentless forces of fate and fled from the final battle that had brought down his Asgard. And it was in such a way they had fallen, hopelessly mortal and flawed beings. Where was their absolution? But it was easier to live in their world of two, in harsh winter, in the warmth of fire and fur and companionship, and not think of secret sorrows. Gradually, the Norseman began to grow contemplative, and she felt afraid. If they moved on from that place, the world and time would begin again, and they would not be able to continue together. His society would dictate that she be his plunder, hers that he be her willing serf. He understood this as well as she, and as he grew more determined to face the destiny he had run from, he knew she would have to face hers one day, but she was not willing yet. On the last evening, sitting by the fire, he spoke softly, and for the first time he told her of his life. But because he was no longer exuberant in his explanations, his face a mask, she didn't understand a word. All she knew was that it was a sad story. He left and took the cold with him. The snow had begun to melt, and from the dead leaves beneath, the first flowers of early spring bloomed. Behind him, he left nothing but crude carvings in the bark of a tree. She touched them gingerly, and tears came to her eyes because she didn't understand them. Her weeping was interrupted by the sound of marching feet, and over the barren hill, an army of cowards running from war appeared. Who were they, and what were they running from? Where were they running to? She realized that they, like her, couldn't go any further. Like her, they were lost. And looking back at the Norsemen's symbols, she thought to herself that they were not unlike a curse. And why should there not be such a place? A place where wanderers could grope in the darkness of their own despair. As for the Norseman, did he die? Did he find absolution? She would never know. Just as she would never understand the words carved in the bark of the tree, carved out with her dagger. This is a place of hope. Thank you.